Two men beat Mike Tyson before the world ever learned to fear him. Before the fists that flattened Michael Spinks in under 2 minutes. Before grown heavyweights walked to the ring already defeated. One of those two men is barely remembered today. The other made a mistake so enormous that 6 years later, Mike Tyson erased him from the sport of boxing in under 3 minutes, and it still wasn't enough to settle the score. Boxing historians still argue about a lot of Mike Tyson's career. His speed, his power, whether he was truly the most dangerous heavyweight who ever lived. But almost nobody argues about this fight. Almost everyone who has studied it agrees on one thing. This wasn't just a comeback. It was personal in a way very few fights in boxing history have ever been. This is the story of the loss Mike Tyson never talks about, and the revenge that came for it. Before Iron Mike, before the champion, before the world knew his name, there was a broken, furious teenager from Brooklyn who had already been arrested more than 30 times before he turned 13. His name was Michael Gerard Tyson, and the only person who saw anything worth saving in him wasn't a cop, a teacher, or his own family. It was a 70-something-year-old boxing trainer named Cus D'Amato, who took one look at a violent kid in a juvenile facility and made a prediction almost nobody believed. He said this boy could become heavyweight champion of the world, not eventually, fast. Cus moved Tyson into his own house. He raised him like a son he'd been waiting his whole life for, and he handed him one dream to chase before anything else: the 1984 Olympics. Cus wanted Tyson to become the youngest heavyweight gold medalist in history. At 17 years old, with hands that could end a fight before it started, it looked unstoppable. In the gym, Tyson was already a rumor. Sparring partners came in confident and left rattled. Word spread through amateur boxing circles that there was a teenager training upstate who hit differently than anyone his age had ever hit. Cus told anyone who would listen that this kid was going to be special, that history was about to remember his name. For the first time in his life, Mike Tyson had something bigger than survival to fight for. He had a mission, and that mission had a date on the calendar. Then came the trials, and a fighter named Henry Tillman stood directly in the way. Nobody outside boxing history remembers Henry Tillman's name now. But in the summer of 1984, he was the one man standing between Mike Tyson and the dream Cus D'Amato had staked his entire life on. Tillman was older, more experienced, and smarter with his distance. And against a still raw, still developing Tyson, he did something almost nobody else on earth would manage for the next 6 years. He beat him. He beat Tyson once at the Olympic trials. Then, weeks later, at a second qualifying tournament, he beat him again. 2 losses. 2 doors slammed shut in the same summer. Tyson's Olympic dream, the one thing Cus D'Amato had built his final years around, was dead. People close to the gym said Tyson was devastated in a way they had never seen before. Not angry, broken. He had trained his entire adolescence for one stage, and a fighter most casual fans have completely forgotten took it from him. Twice, in front of every scout, every judge, and every reporter who mattered in American boxing. The second loss was the one that stung the most. It came at the box office, the final qualifying tournament, in a decision so close that people in the building argued about it long after the scorecards were read. Some ringside observers thought Tyson had done more than enough to win. It didn't matter. The judges saw it differently. And in Olympic boxing, the judges are the only opinion that counts. Tyson walked out of that arena having done everything right and still losing everything that mattered. Henry Tillman went on to Los Angeles that summer. He fought in the Olympics. He won gold. Mike Tyson went home with nothing. No medal, no stage. Just a promise from Cus D'Amato that the story wasn't finished, and a wound that would take years to close. What almost nobody in that arena understood in 1984 was what they had actually just done. They hadn't beaten a kid and moved on. They had created a monster with a memory that didn't forget anything. Cus D'Amato pushed Tyson into the professional ranks almost immediately after. There was no more time to wait around for validation from judges and Olympic committees who had already made their choice. Tyson turned pro, and what happened next terrified the entire sport of boxing. Opponent after opponent went down. Not in the championship distance, not in the middle rounds, in the first, sometimes in the first minute. Trainers began warning their fighters before Tyson had even turned 20. Don't hold eye contact at the weigh-in. Don't shake his hand too long. More than one opponent later admitted, on camera, that they were afraid before the opening bell ever rang. Tyson wasn't just knocking men out anymore. He was erasing their will to fight before a single punch landed. But Cus D'Amato never got to see how his own story ended. He died in November of 1985, only months into Tyson's professional career, before his fighter ever won a title. Tyson would later say that losing Cus hit him harder than any punch he had ever taken in his life. The one man who believed in him when nobody else did was suddenly gone, and Tyson was about to become the youngest heavyweight champion in history without him in the corner to see it happen. In November of 1986, at just 20 years old, Mike Tyson did exactly what Cus had always said he would. He faced Trevor Berbick for the WBC heavyweight title and dismantled him so badly that Berbick could barely stand up straight afterward, stumbling around the ring like a man who had forgotten which way was up. Tyson became heavyweight champion of the world, the youngest in history. From that night forward, he became something closer to a myth than a man. He unified the titles against Larry Holmes and James Bone Crusher Smith. He faced Michael Spinks, a man some experts thought could finally outbox him, and instead watched him collapse in under 2 minutes, so fast that half the arena was still finding their seats when it ended. Fighters lost before they ever threw a real punch. Fans packed arenas just to see how fast it would end this time. Promoters admitted privately that they struggled to find opponents willing to sign the contract. For nearly 4 straight years, nobody on the planet could touch him. Then, in February of 1990, in Tokyo, the impossible happened. A heavy underdog named Buster Douglas, a fighter almost nobody outside boxing media had heard of, walked in as a 40-to-1 long shot and simply refused to be afraid. He absorbed Tyson's best shots, kept coming forward, and in the 10th round, dropped him with a combination that sent Tyson crawling across the canvas, groping blindly for his mouthpiece as the referee counted him out. The most feared man in sports had been knocked out cold. It remains, to this day, one of the greatest upsets in the history of sports. Overnight, the aura was gone. The fear that had won Tyson half his fights before the opening bell had cracked wide open, live, in front of the entire world. Suddenly, there was a question nobody thought they would ever get to ask again. Was Mike Tyson finished? Tyson needed to answer that question, and he needed to answer it fast. His team needed an opponent for the comeback fight. Someone who could prove, instantly and undeniably, that the monster hadn't died in Tokyo. And out of every heavyweight on the planet, the name they landed on stunned the boxing world. Henry Tillman, the same man who had beaten him twice in 1984. The same man who had taken the Olympic dream Cus D'Amato spent his final years building. 6 years had passed since that summer. Tillman had turned pro as well, quietly building a respectable record, never sharing a ring again with the teenager he had twice defeated. He had his own gold medal, his own career, his own life, completely separate from Mike Tyson's rise to power. Now, out of nowhere, that life was about to collide with it again. At the press conference announcing the fight, reporters couldn't stop bringing up 1984. They asked Tillman what it felt like to finally get a shot at Tyson as a professional. They asked Tyson what it meant to face the man who had cost him his Olympic dream. Tyson gave short, flat answers, the kind of answers that told you everything, by saying almost nothing at all. Everyone in that room understood exactly what this fight actually was. It wasn't a tune-up, it was an execution, 6 years in the making, and the whole sport knew it before the opening bell. June 16, 1990, Las Vegas. The bell rang, and whatever restraint Tyson had shown as a disciplined amateur in 1984 was nowhere to be found. He didn't wait. He didn't feel Tillman out the way trainers teach young fighters to. He hunted him from the very first second, throwing with a violence that looked less like sport and more like 6 years of buried humiliation, finally finding a target that couldn't run. Tillman tried to survive it. He covered up. He tried to create distance the way he had back in 1984, using his jab and his legs to keep Tyson at range. None of it mattered. This wasn't an amateur bout with headgear and 3-minute rounds judged on points. This was Tyson at his most dangerous, with nothing standing between his fists and Tillman's chin except 6 years of anger looking for an exit. Tyson broke his guard down in seconds, trapped him against the ropes, and landed a combination that put Tillman on the canvas in a way that left no doubt and no controversy whatsoever. Nothing close to the tight, disputed decisions that had haunted Tyson back in 1984. Tillman's own corner didn't even bother to argue with the referee's count. There was nothing left to argue. 2 minutes and 47 seconds. That's how long it lasted. The man who once needed a full 3 rounds and a set of scorecards to beat Mike Tyson didn't survive a single round against him as a professional. The Olympic gold medalist who had crushed a 17-year-old's dream was knocked out so completely that ringside commentators struggled to describe what they had just watched in real time. The crowd barely had time to settle into their seats before it was already over. Ringside reporters, who had spent weeks writing about whether Tyson was finished, were suddenly rewriting their entire story in real time. Fans who came expecting a cautious, rusty ex-champion instead watched the version of Tyson that had terrified the division for 4 straight years, back and fully intact, with a target that had been circled in his mind since he was 17 years old. For Tyson, the message mattered more than the knockout itself. He hadn't just beaten Henry Tillman. He had reached back 6 years and rewritten the one result from his amateur career that still haunted him every time someone brought up 1984. Reporters in that arena understood this fight was never really about proving Tyson could still punch after Tokyo. It was about a debt from 1984 finally getting collected, in full, with 6 brutal years of interest attached. Henry Tillman never got another shot at anything close to that magnitude again. He fought on for a few more years, picking up scattered wins against opponents nobody remembers, but the damage to his career and his reputation was permanent. His career quietly faded, and the loss to Tyson became the single most remembered moment of his entire professional run. Not the Olympic gold medal draped around his neck in 1984. Not the 2 amateur wins that once broke a teenager's heart in front of the whole sport. Just the 2 minutes and 47 seconds it took to lose it all back, live, in front of a sold-out arena in Las Vegas. And Tyson. The win didn't erase every doubt Buster Douglas had planted in Tokyo. Nothing fully could. Tyson would go on to lose his title for real just over a year later, in a fight that had nothing to do with Tillman or 1984. But on that one night in June of 1990, in front of a Las Vegas crowd that had come to see if he was broken, Tyson proved one thing beyond any argument. The fear that made him different from every heavyweight who came before him, the fear that started in a juvenile detention hall, was nurtured by an old man who saw a killer instinct nobody else could see, and was tested and broken by an Olympic loss in 1984, was still alive. Still loaded. Still capable of ending a man's career in under 3 minutes flat. Cus D'Amato never lived to see it. He never got to watch the broken kid he pulled off the street turn his most painful defeat into one of the most ruthless answers in boxing history. But somewhere in that brutal, one-sided beating in Las Vegas, in every punch Tyson didn't need to throw but threw anyway, there was a message meant for exactly one man who wasn't there to hear it. Every legend needs an origin wound, the loss that explains everything that came after it. For Muhammad Ali, it was Joe Frazier. For countless other champions, it was a single night they never stopped replaying in their heads. For Mike Tyson, it was two decisions in the summer of 1984, handed down by judges who had no idea they were creating a monster instead of stopping one. 6 years is a long time to wait for anything. It is an unbearably long time to wait for revenge. But Mike Tyson waited, carried it through the death of the only man who ever truly believed in him, carried it through becoming the youngest heavyweight champion in history, and carried it even through the single worst night of his professional life in Tokyo. And when the moment finally came, he didn't need 6 rounds, or 6 minutes, or even 3. He needed 2 minutes and 47 seconds to close a wound that had been open since he was 17 years old. Some fighters get revenge with a trophy. Mike Tyson got his with a warning to the rest of the world. Take something from him, and he will remember it for exactly as long as it takes to find you again.